Oh, wow, there it is. 1, 2, 3. Whoop, that's it. Okay, great. Graham, we're not using this one, right? I don't think so. Because it's not connected to anything. All right, let's get started. Welcome, everyone, to our Climate Action Forum. If you can hear me, you're in the right place. If you can't hear me, just ignore me. Oh, okay. We good, Graham? All right, excellent. All right, so Cameron and Penelope and Judy, I think, are going to make their way up this way. If you're in the parish hall, turn your attention this direction. If you would rather have conversation, I invite you to converse out of doors so that we can make sure we can all hear each other for this forum. Okay, who's first? Penelope is first. Here you go.
Thank you. I'm going to set this right in here. Oh, okay. That's fine. Welcome. I'm glad you're here. The issue of our warming planet and the many catastrophic events that have occurred because of it leaves many of us confused and even paralyzed about what we can do. At times it seems huge and insurmountable. But first, it's important to realize two things. First, it's not your fault. The problem is a result of a system that no longer works, and one that was built on ideas of endless consumption and constant extraction with no eye to limits. As Annalise said in this morning's sermon so well, this system had flaws that meant it had to be sustained by deception and even violence. Secondly, despite the immensity of the problem, it's important to remember that small things add up to big ones. The damage done may seem insurmountable, but changes we make by ourselves and in community are what will eventually change the direction of the planet. And the three of us, Cameron and Judy and I, have met a few times, and we've found hope in various places. First of all, young people are moving on this issue because their lives are most affected, and older folks are joining in. Last Sunday, there were marches against fossil fuel all over the world, and a huge one in New York City. Secondly, progress is being made. We are moving away from fossil fuels in our homes and our cars. It's slow, but it's clearly a prerogative for many of us. And as we update our stoves and furnaces and cars, we're turning to electric and augmenting our electric with solar. Third, there is a justice component that may help provide the needed resources to counter the problem. For example, our own state of California is now in a court case with 5 major fossil fuel companies, and we are seeking financial compensation for the recent disasters in our state, the fires, the storms, and the floods. The state contends that the fossil fuel companies knew about global warming up to 70 years ago and consciously lied about the connection with their products. Fourth, some goals we can envision make the future much brighter. One podcast that I listened to, put together by concerned children, says that if everyone on the planet planted 2 trees a year, we could solve the problem. That may seem daunting at first, but we have made huge strides globally with vaccinations, and such a big ask is more possible than it may initially seem. Fifth, we have dealt with huge world problems and found ways to cope. One example, which for many older people, myself included, seems almost impossible in retrospect, is that we have lived with proliferating nuclear weapons and their vast potential for destroying this planet for over 70 years, and we are still here. It's still a great international problem we have to work on, but we have managed deterrence and have been able to live with it. And finally, odd as it may seem, concern for the planet and the future of life on it has long been a concern of people of faith. In the 4th century, St. Basil the Great wrote this prayer that I would like to pray with you as we begin this discussion. So let us pray. Enlarge within us the sense of fellowship with all living things, our brothers and sisters, the animals to whom you gave the earth as their home in common with us. We remember with shame that in the past we have exercised the high dominion of humans with ruthless cruelty, so that the voice of the earth, which should have gone up to you in song, has been a groan of travail. May we realize that they live not for us alone, but for themselves and for you, and that they love the sweetness of life. We pray through our Savior Jesus Christ, who lifts up and redeems us all. Amen. And from our discussions and research, the three of us have come to believe that there is good reason to hope. So we invite you to join with us in our climate action. And we also invite you to think about the fact that collectively we can make a difference and protect this beautiful creation for future generations. And so now Judy is going to talk about some climate change organizations to which St. Jude's already belongs.
So this whole climate action team came out of an SJO survey where we asked people's main concerns, and the primary concern was climate change. And so we formed this committee just recently to address this concern. We are currently members of organizations that we belong to that address the politics of climate change. This is so hard to say. The Episcopal Public Policy Network, EPPN, highlights national legislation dealing with all sorts of issues, but among them is climate change, and gives recommendations for actions for parishes and individuals. Now let's see. We're also members of the Interfaith Power and Light. Now, I've been looking at their website for a long time, and I did not realize that we were members. This organization began in 1998 with the support of Grace Cathedral as a coalition of Episcopal churches aggregated to purchase renewable energy. 2 years later, they broadened their focus and brought in other faith partners, and the California Interfaith Power and Light organization was born. The Reverend Canon Sally G. Bingham was the founder and was one of the first faith leaders to fully recognize that global warming is a core moral issue. Now there are 40 state affiliates, and the goal is to have affiliates in every state. Now Cameron will talk about the steps that St. Jude's has already taken to address climate change.
Thank you. All right. I know that I've only been here for about a year working now, but what many of you may not know is that I've actually have a bit of a history with St. Jude's. My first time being here was almost 15 years ago when I was being confirmed, and I actually got confirmed at St. Jude's. And the campus looked a lot different. Judy, if we could get the slide. So there I am at 13 years old, and I dug up this old photo because I noticed how much of a blacktop there was behind me. There's the farmhouse, and this entire courtyard used to be a parking lot. And now, of course, it's our wonderful courtyard that we love so much. And that's just the beginning of the things that we've done to make changes. Making our space more of a carbon sink than a carbon emitter. It's a permeable green space that allows water to sink back into the water table. It cools down the surface of the campus, and of course, it's very lovely to just hang out in and look at. It's a very important aspect of the current system to stop reflecting back solar energy back into the atmosphere, which is part of the greenhouse effect, and to create areas that will help take in more carbon. So with that, another thing that we've done is the upkeep of our historical orchard and our garden, our community garden in the back. So Penelope is going to talk to you a little bit more about that.
One of the most impressive things to me about St. Jude's when I first came here is the community garden and the orchard. This church community is rare with the attention and use of our green space. The orchard trees have been lovingly tended by Steve Swayze and Nick Hara when he's been in town, and they've become a symbol of our church. The apricot window is a good example. Last year, our deacon, Robin, brought beehives, and they're still with us, pollinating and adding life to the orchard. I think we have an image there, but there's the community garden too. No, that's okay. That's fine, Judy. The community garden has been developed and used by a variety of people, notably Dan Putler when he was here, and now with Doug Bailey, Peter Troop, Rose Pellicer, and there are many more. The flowers grown are used to adorn our altar by Susan Lancer, and the produce is given to parishioners and to Santa Maria Ministry. It's clear that green space is a priority at St. Jude's. It's also evident in our not readily apparent solar panels, which Judy will tell you about now. Someone else wants to talk.
St. Jude's made a huge step towards independence from fossil fuels by installing solar panels. You may not even be aware that we have solar panels because they're on the back of the church on the south side and we don't see them. Our solar installation was made possible through parishioners' contributions for this specific purpose. There were two separate phases. In 2007, Don Disney organized the first solar funding project that resulted in the installation, this means nothing to me, but 8.4 kilowatt system. And then later Don and Susan Witherspoon organized a second solar array, and Mike Landis shepherded this installation. It was an 11.4 kilowatt system. Now this is the interesting part. So that gives us 20 kilowatts. And to give you an idea what that means, the average size solar installation for a 2,000 square foot home is 7 kilowatts. So ours is roughly the equivalent of the solar installation of 3 homes. And Cameron will talk about recent actions.
Yes, so hopefully that's given you an idea that even though we've just started our committee for climate action, we've actually already been doing a lot to move forward and become a more climate-aware church and parish. Now we want to talk more about things that are ongoing that we're continuing to do as a community. For instance, I've noticed that we've got lots of bike-friendly and pedestrian-friendly roads right near our church. We've got well-marked bike paths, and we've got separated bike lanes in our on McClellan right here to allow for safer bike traffic, which is something that this year I've taken up a lot more. It was my New Year's resolution to be less car dependent. And fortunately, through some of the work of our own parishioners, I believe Jennifer Sheeran was doing a lot of work in advocating for more bike-friendly roads in Cupertino. So fortunately through that, we've become much more bike-friendly, and we can even see we've got bikes here. I've rode my bike today. More and more people are starting to use this as it becomes available. So we want to keep doing that and push for more and more bike and pedestrian-friendly zones around the community. I also believe that Doug Bailey has offered up his services to help fix anyone's bike. If you've got an old bike in your garage that you haven't taken out in, I don't know, I think mine was in our garage for 10 years before I started writing it again. So we want to just help break down the barriers of entry to become a little bit more individually climate conscious as we're also working as a community to come together. I believe Penelope is going to talk some more about what we're doing in our garden to be more conscious of how different garden practices affect the environment.
Thank you. We now have S.J. Phillips as our Minister of Gardens, and she plans to do responsible revisioning, taking into account habitats to protect and plants that attract birds, butterflies, moths, and other pollinators. I don't know if people are aware, but an owl was recently here, and a great blue heron was even here a while back in the orchard, and we had a little family of rabbits that showed up. And so nature recognizes our work and responds to our welcome. SJ says she also will move toward drought-tolerant and California native plants. We won't be using any pesticides and plan to add mulch to prevent water evaporation. She's thinking of bringing in bee hotels in addition to our hives and welcoming other insects such as praying mantis into our green space. Some of you may remember the recent loss of a redwood behind this building. We gave thanks for the tree and planted another one and had a celebration in Thanksgiving for the new one. And we're also hoping to plant some biblical trees that will bear fruit in our urban garden, and have begun with an olive tree, which Doug planted on Service Sunday, hope to gain a pomegranate and a fig, so 3 biblical trees out there. And now Judy's going to tell you about some very important legislation on climate change that is pending and how you can best influence it.
Thank you. So, a French philosopher, Charles Péguy, stated that everything begins in mysticism and ends in politics. For us as Episcopalians, our mysticism begins with the Trinity and ends in politics as we try to follow Jesus' concern for the poor and the example of St. Francis and others in their concern for creation. During Service Worship Sunday, we wrote letters for a cause and looked for, legislation supported by the Episcopal Public Policy Network. Mary Souza looked for this, as did Roy Hader before her. The EPPN only focuses on national issues. So we also did a little searching for state issues at that point. I really like this website, and I've included it on a handout that I forgot. So I will make sure it's here next Sunday, and I'll try to link it to the YouTube. And now we'll transition to discussing some actions that we can take in the future, primarily as a parish, but also as a conduit for discussion and information regarding some individual actions that we can take. The first is heat pumps. So when the heater in the parish hall needed repairs about a year ago, we had to decide between $13,000 for repair, $27,000 for a new gas heater, and $84,000 for a heat pump. Gas heaters release methane, which is a more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. We also release methane into our homes, which is a health hazard that we often don't even think about. In fact, recently a study concluded that almost 13% of all childhood asthma can be attributed to gas stove pollution. Our older heaters in the sanctuary, parish hall, classrooms, and farmhouse are all gas. In addition, they lack instant-on pilot lights, which, so they always are having a small burning of methane all the time, in addition to the methane that is released when the heaters are used. Replacing a gas heater with a heat pump, which works like an air conditioner in reverse, It uses electricity to pull in ambient air and remove the cold air, leaving the warm air to be circulated. In addition, a heat pump also provides air conditioning, which we currently don't have except in the classrooms and the farmhouse. The vestry, though, when faced with these decisions, voted, myself included, to repair the existing heater rather than installing a heat pump, mainly because churches don't have $84,000 just sitting around. However, we're looking to the future. It makes sense to plan for a transition to electric when the next major repair comes. In a few days, I will be participating in a tour of local all-electric homes. This is a tour of the Peninsula and South Bay, and I hope to learn more about heat pumps, electric water heaters, and solar, and hopefully find out about possible grants and loans. I'm going to put a link on the connected to this YouTube in case you would like to attend. Cameron will now talk about alternative transit and future volunteer opportunities.
Thank you, Judy. As we were just discussing things that we've already done to, and things that we are ongoing aspects of our climate action team. Now we're starting to talk a little bit more about potential new things that we can do as a community to help reduce our carbon emissions and to help care for the creation that we love so much. One of those things that is big in my heart is public transit. It's a huge aspect, and I think we all know that Americans are very dependent on our cars, especially single occupant vehicles. I believe that a big part of that is just it's a little bit tricky to figure out. There's a little bit of mysticism and maybe a bit of stigma too against using public transit in America, whereas in other countries, everybody, no matter where you fall economically or socially, is all using subway systems and bus systems and stuff like that. So things that we can do in the future is help reduce that mysticism of public transit. I hope to start posting bus routes around campus so that we can all start to learn a little bit more. Oh, if I wanted to take the bus, how would I get from my house to St. Jude's? We're very lucky that we're right next to De Anza, so there's a big bus stop right there. So we all should be able to find at least some route to help with that. And another thing that would do is help normalize taking the bus in our community so that there is less of a stigma. If we all have this idea that taking the bus is a little bit dodgy, then people won't take it. But if we as a community start intentionally taking the bus and making it more of a safe space for people, especially children, the elderly, and women can sometimes feel uneasy on public transportation. So if we as a community can help put that worry at ease, then all of a sudden it becomes something where more people will see it as a viable option. Then all of a sudden, politically, it becomes a better option to make a more robust bus system. And it just helps us reduce our overall car use and carbon emissions as a society. Another thing that we hope to start doing in the future is coming up with volunteer opportunities where we as a community can do things to help get our hands in the dirt, so to speak. A lot of climate action really boils down to political action and things that we can do to change society, but that can sometimes feel exhausting, and it can sometimes feel like we're not really doing anything, almost like we're banging our heads against the wall. So one thing to help alleviate that is to go out into nature and help, actually clean it up through creek, estuary, wetland cleanups, park cleanups. There's a lot of efforts to pull invasive species from local parks around here. I know that I've helped with a couple organizations that go out and I will say it's hard work being out in the sun and just basically pulling weeds, but it's work that needs to be done to help preserve nature and preserve our especially wonderful Bay Area, California ecosystems. It's something that we can also do, and we can also see. COVID, of course, was a terrible time for all of us, but it was a wonderful time for nature. As we were not out and about so much, there were things like the Hudson River was starting to clear up. Dolphins were swimming in Venice, So if we can just start to live more in harmony with those systems and actually work to protect them, I think that would be great, and it would give us a little bit of morale as we continue to fight climate change. Now Judy's going to talk a little bit about carbon offsets and donation and investment opportunities that we can do.
So recently, we've been hearing a lot about carbon offsets. Individuals usually use carbon offsets to offset their carbon footprint from travel. Flying is one of the largest sources of individual carbon contributions. Companies often use carbon offsets to say that their activities are carbon neutral. And of course, there's been controversy about these offsets. Companies who have taken funds to plant trees have failed to plant them or have not maintained the trees they planted. Airlines offer their own offsets, but they tend to underestimate the carbon expended and overestimate the offsets. In a few weeks, my sister-in-law and Ken and a friend of mine from high school are all headed on a cruise to Panama Canal. And traveling is something I've been looking forward to all through COVID. In retirement, I thought, I'll take a trip or two a year. And then I read an article that suggested waiting to travel until airlines had more efficient planes. So that might be okay if you're 30, but if you're in your 70s, you have limited time to wait. So I researched different carbon offsets and decided to check the Sierra Club's recommendations because I thought they'd be pretty careful that the ones that they were recommending weren't greenwashing. And they recommended two different funds, the Carbon Footprint and carbonfund.org. I'm going to show things from the Carbon Fund just because our website's better. But some of the things that the Carbon Footprint had just the tiniest little pictures. So one of the things that people can donate to is Kenya Burn Stoves Project. Burn stoves that people use in developing countries tend to use wood and have a big carbon footprint. Plus, they're not very healthy for the people who are living in the communities or in the home. And so they provide solar burn stoves. The other one I thought was interesting is truck drivers will keep their trucks running when they're sleeping or at a rest stop because it keeps their air conditioning going. And so these electrified truck stops actually give them a place to plug in their truck so that they don't have to keep it running and, pulls out all those tailpipe emissions. Oh, there was a third one that I don't think. Oh, and then the other one was reforestation. In terms of ESG funds, that's something that has really become popular lately. And for those of us who have the means to invest money or have retirement funds, how our money is invested can be an area to consider for climate change. However, this is a very contentious area. People say that the company stock has already been sold and so that you're not making a difference. And the companies that provide the funds actually sometimes are not honest in what their funds actually provide. But ESG stands for environmental, meaning climate change, natural resource use, pollution, and clean tech. And then the social is human capital, liability, data privacy, health and safety, and the governance is accounting practice, ownership control, board independence, and ethics. These funds are increasingly popular, and when they first started, they did not pay as well as other funds, but now they seem to be becoming more equal. Sometimes funds deliberately use deceptive data to make it look like they are more green than they say. I feel like I'm fortunate because I'm a teacher, and all my retirement is in TIAA, and let me tell you, you never get your money transferred out of TIAA. So you only have one decision with TIAA to make, and that's whether you'll fund an ESG fund or a traditional fund. I'm not aware of how other funds work, and I kind of went into looking into it, and it is so confusing. I'm hoping that someone with financial experience will help us muddle our way through this. Penelope will now talk about how we will be joining with other churches and groups to have a greater voice.
Well, first let me say that when the three of us met, we spent a good amount of time discussing our direction, and it's huge, as you can see. It goes in many, many areas. And while we value larger community action more than just this particular parish, we really want to start by developing St. Jude's own climate action plan first and foremost. We want to hear from you. We want our work to reflect this community and our concerns, and we hope a number of you will join with us. But we realize that wider collective action is also very effective. And so while we belong to a few things like the larger Episcopal Church and Power and Light, we do plan eventually to join with other Episcopal churches. For example, St. Timothy's Mountain View has an active climate group going. It's been going for several years. And other faith-based groups in the area do as well. And other churches can give us new direction and information. Judy spoke about all-electric homes, and there are churches in the Diocese of Northern California and in California that have moved to make themselves energy independent. And they can help us learn about and reach our own goals. And there are local community groups here in Cupertino and in Santa Clara County that may also wish to join with us on projects, and we plan to reach out to invite them in the future. And we particularly want to get young folks involved as well, because this is their future and their life. And so Cameron, of course, is the face of our group. And he will now summarize for us, and then we can follow with any questions or discussions you may wish to have.
Thanks, Penelope. So the main thing we want to get across is it's not all doom and gloom when it comes to climate change. We've already been taking action. We've made investments in solar. We've kept our historical orchard. We've taken away some of our blacktop space to create more green space. We're working on new things, and we hope, and us as a community are trying to come up with new opportunities and possibilities that we can do as a community in the future. It's also important to mention that this is a very marketable program. I know that church growth is always a very important, big thing in all of our brains, and we want to grow the church, and we especially want more young people coming to church. And this is an opportunity to make St. Jude's a place where, maybe at first they might not be interested in coming to church, but at least they can volunteer and do good works with us. And, that I think that's step one. And then if they stay and join the community, that's great. But if not, at least we're doing some good work with people outside of just our parish. Another thing that we as a committee really want to do is just break down those barriers of knowledge that people might have when it comes to climate conscious decisions. I know that it feels, solar power, like switch your home to solar power seems like a very easy thing to say, and then you start researching it and it's like, oh my gosh, there's so much to take in, the economics of this. So we're hoping that we can start doing some of that research as a committee to help give the parish to help break down the barrier, give the parish the knowledge to make those decisions for themselves instead of having to do all the work. To close this out, I just want to say that we are making good efforts, and we'll continue to make good efforts. As much good as we can do as individuals, it's social and political action that will move forward. And although this seems like an impossible ask of a community, I would like to remind us that we are St. Jude's, the patron saint of impossible causes. So I think together we can help make the world a better place. Thank you.
All right, so I think y'all are going to take some questions. So could all three of you come up here, and then I will be the roving microphone person to bring the microphone to Charlotte first, and then whoever else after that. And then at the end, after a few questions, I'll close us, and I want to give you a preview of our next forum, at least the next one I know of. And hopefully Joy can come and share a bit about the book that she wrote that she'll be talking about in a month. So that's a preview for the preview of the forum that's yet to come. But first, questions. And let me give this to you, and I will come to Charlotte, and then Graham, and then Thomas, and then Steve. Okay, Charlotte first.
Thank you. It's not so much of a question as I wanted to let you know, in the kitchen, the coffee hosting, we transitioned out of styrofoam cups using the wonderful donated cups,
Yes.
the mugs that we wash every time.
Yep.
We're now using compostable plates. They're sugarcane fiber plates. And we use the coffee grounds. They go into the gardening center, and they go around with the flowers. And something that I think would be interesting to look at is whether or not people would be willing to transition out of the plastic forks and knives and use regular ones. Mm-hmm. So we could look at that. So anyway,
Yeah.
just want to let you know what we've done.
That's part of the committee, is collecting the ideas of the whole community, because I'm sure that everybody's got their own areas that they're very much more knowledgeable than we are. So it's nice to have so many minds to help us out.
Absolutely. You want to respond to what Charlotte said, Irene?
I just have a question, okay, for everyone regarding transitioning to a metal, a reusable, because we also use resources to wash those, right? So I think it's a question of which resource do we use more. Does it take more resource to make these plastic spoons, or does it take more resource to clean these? So that's always just a question.
It is a good question. It's something I've looked into before, and I believe it takes a lot more water to create the plastic spoons. Also, you don't actually have to wash your metal forks. You could just lick them.
That's why Francis is here, right,
I'm not saying
Donna?
it's a good one, but it's an option.
Yeah,
All right,
Animal
Graham.
Pet Blessing is coming up.
We'd have to put our names on the forks so we can reuse them the next time. Right. Two questions. First is, have we got to the point where we can select various approaches? That's question one. And then the follow-up, if we have got to that point, do all the approaches require financial investment? Yeah? Or are some of them kind of free? Thank you.
Yeah. So
Thanks, Graham.
there's definitely a large looming financial aspect to a lot of climate change things. So part of what we're trying to come up with is how do we balance out the things that we can do that are free, or at least very low financial costs to us, like volunteer options to help out, versus the things that we can do here on campus that are more financial asks, like replacing the heater. So it's a bit of a balancing act, and it's a bit of a we're still figuring it out, and part of that being we need to plan for these and budget out for them. So if we We haven't quite gotten to the point where we say, oh, here's our plan, come up with a financial plan for, replacing the heaters, for instance. We haven't quite gotten to that point, but we're hoping that as we grow our committee with more people and we can prioritize certain things and we can come up with, a 10-year, 15-year plan to help pick and choose our battles a little bit while we're also doing a more consistent, month to month, year by year, less of a financial ask. Do you guys have anything to add on that?
Graham, did that answer your question? All right, Thomas, and then Steve, and then Rob.
Hi, my name's Thomas. About 15 years ago, that we did green energy research as part of our Democratic Club. So at that time, we said natural gas technology seems a good alternative because it's 1/3 less polluting than petroleum fuel. So time has changed. I think mainly the difference over these years that battery technology has really made a difference. For example, in Australia, like coal plants are closing because they cannot beat the price of wind and solar energy in Australia. And even in the United States, I think within 2 years, the price of electric car will be cheaper than a gasoline-powered car. So in all these places, when you have the new technology, makes sense for the consumer, then people will move. But I also think that when government try to impose their policy, then people will rebel. Like I heard, like in the valley, the government will outlaw people from using gas burner. That's bad because we need, like in order to support my electric car, I pulled out the circuit from our clothes dryer. So now I'm stuck with my gas heater.
Thank you, Thomas. Yeah, things as the technology continues to adapt and as we make changes, it definitely changes the scenarios that we're presented with for sure.
And this
Judy.
is exactly why we want
Steve.
more people on our team, because more ideas and more brain power just makes things much better. Also, if anyone online has questions, I want to let you know that I'm kind of popping back and forth to look at the computer.
Great. Thanks, Judy. Steve?
I had two areas. One was about the orchard. Is it considered, part of the gardens? I noticed that there was some nice pruning, shaping work done out there. I didn't know who to ask about, who was doing that.
I think Steve Swayze.
Oh, okay.
Is Steve here? Yeah. So there you go.
And the other question was, in terms of, is it worth investing, the dollars and cents of a thing? As our PG&E bill, what's our annual electric component and what's our gas component of that?
Great question. So two things real quick, and I don't know if you all have things, so I just want to... So Steve has been doing a ton of pruning in the orchard. We just consulted with an orchardist a couple months ago, and the orchardist gave us some great advice about what we need to be doing in the orchard to sustain the trees. And unlike in the past where we would prune in the winter, the orchardist is now telling us to prune in the late summer so the trees can then, while they're still green, so the trees can produce enough energy to store for the winter so they can come back stronger. Sort of a different philosophy of pruning that you may have heard in the past. So that's why we're doing the pruning now, and Steve got trained in that and is working on that. As far as the electric and gas usage, funny you should ask, because one of the things that we're looking for on our ops team is for someone to do some number crunching so we can sort of assess all of our bills, gas, electric, water, etc., and know our usage and the cost so that year over year we can determine how much usage we're getting, how that's changing, obviously for budgeting purposes, but also so we can make wise decisions about that. I think Judy's going to add to that. No, Judy's not going to add to that.
But SJ has
SJ can go first.
Okay.
Just two things. To answer whether it's part of the gardens, I did make a specific recommendation that the orchard is not part of the garden ministry because I believe it needs specialist attention, and I felt that I could not offer that expertise. So it is in, orchard specialist people's hands, together with Steve being trained by Nick and their involvement. So just one other thing to comment on your topic about promoting public transport and getting over the stigma of taking it. So on. There's kind of a bigger issue at hand, and that is actually the way our cities are designed here. Mm-hmm. The cities here are designed for the car and not for the human pedestrian scale. Mm-hmm. And so that's a political thing where we do need to push for more higher density, mixed use areas, and that kind of get that critical mass to support public transport. And here, because things are just so spread out, it breaks down. It can't function as it does in Europe, where people, can easily walk to that and then get intermodal to hop onto another. So there's a real push for
Yeah, I know that
changing to urban planning.
City planning is a huge aspect into making public transit viable. I think, but maybe it's just part of my own philosophy of kind of proving to people like, hey, we're making a push to use public transit more, so can you help us out by also doing the other steps that we can't as individuals do to make it more viable for both sides? So I agree that it's a very multifaceted thing. I did want to also respond to Thomas real quick because I know that we didn't mention it in our presentation, but the idea of power banks and large-scale batteries was something that we brought up as a potential investment for the church, so we can store some of the energy that we're getting through our solar panels. But that's another financial discussion and lots more research. We didn't really know very much about that area, so we have to do more research on that.
Absolutely. All right, so Robin's next, and then I think I saw Doug, and then I saw Irene. Steve, just to sort of clarify, we have sort of a division of labor. SJ, as Minister of Gardens, is responsible for all of the gardens, with the exception of the urban farm, which is Doug Bailey's domain, and then the orchard, which is Steve and Nick's domain. So that's sort of our division of labor. Yeah.
Two or three things. Back on replacing the heater for here, mm-hmm. Memory serves me, so tell me if I'm wrong, for who was in the discussion. We also would have had to change all the ductwork because it was out of compliance to put in a heat pump. And that, I believe, brought the cost over $100,000. Mm-hmm. So, it's not just a easy swap out for things. Right. The other is in terms of using metal versus plastic. The plastic doesn't ever go away, to me is one of the issues. And so like when you go to the store, like milk, it comes in plastic bottles or it comes in paper cartons. Well, pick the paper because it'll disappear eventually, mm-hmm. and the plastic won't. Even if it's recycled, a lot of stuff is not getting recycled. I think what I heard once was a very low percentage. Egg cartons is another one. There's plastic egg cartons, there's styrofoam egg cartons, which are both not good environmentally. And then there's the pulp paper ones, which will disintegrate. Mm-hmm. And at least in Mountain View, the pulp ones can go in our compost. I don't know about other cities in their compost.
Thank you, Robin. And now Doug. You're going to follow up on Robin? Hold on, wait.
Which of these is environmentally responsible? Which is irresponsible? We can wash these, and I'll volunteer to wash them. These get thrown away. They are not biodegradable, If we bury these in the garden, they'll be there on doomsday. So I'm going to suggest that we do not purchase any more plastic spoons, knives, forks, that we get in a supply of steel.
Yep.
Okay, and you heard Doug say he's willing to wash them. So just collect a bunch, and then Doug will be here all night.
Yep.
All right, Irene, I believe you're next, and then let's maybe 5 more minutes and we'll wrap up.
In answer, by the way, in response to Doug, totally right. And by the way, I never take another piece of plastic in my home, even though I asked that question. And I have reused all of my plastics. I have not thrown them out. I've been using them. So I don't actually throw them out at all. I just recycle them in my home over and over again for every single party I have. So but I never take another one in. I wanted to answer the question. I want to respond about the cost. Okay, we put in, after St. Jude's put in the solar panels, so we did the same thing in our home, and but we did the lease option, so there's no upfront, huge investment. And so there is, if you do the upfront investment, it's a huge cost. We took the lease option, and actually we didn't actually save anything. We were just breaking even for several years. It would have been the same if we paid. It was more a commitment to climate change. It's not a financial thing. If you think you're going to save money, it's a different thing. But if you're committed to climate change, you do it. But it actually didn't save us any money for several years, because the prices for the PGA was quite low. And then the prices changed, and then now we are saving some. But we don't regret it, because it's a commitment to better for the climate. But if you think of doing it for lower costs, you save some money in your home, not necessarily so.
Yes, a big part of this is just consciously thinking ahead of where can we put some money away, so that in the future, if we can have more of a little windfall to make more climate conscious decisions when it comes to replacement and new things, and versus going with what we've been doing. A big thing that we were constantly saying in our meetings was life will not look the same if we're acting consciously. We will have to make changes, and some of them will have to be hard decisions, but we want to be able to put our best foot forward and try to use that as an opportunity to be, beacons of here's things you can do.
Let's see, Christine, and then SJ and Robin, could you take a peek at the computer there to see if anybody online's asked anything?
One suggestion is, I think the garbage is over here. It's good that they're all separated, but sometimes it's confusing what goes into which garbage. And I'm thinking that maybe there needs to be some kind of better signage and clarity about what goes where, and maybe even a forum on the garbages. But an instructional, maybe a game or something.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? And then the other question is, what about wind power? Can you possibly harness any wind power?
Well, we do have a lot of hot air, so I don't know about wind power. I'll refer to our committee, and I know that this is a softball. I'm setting you up. I know they've talked about our receptacles and what goes where. So
yes, it ties into a lot of what we were saying earlier about just education of what to do, and just breaking down the barriers so that we can. So that there's no question of, I don't know, which receptacle this goes into. So that ties into things, we'd like to put up more signage just to show, and I think Judy had.
I was going to say, I actually cut and pasted and made some signs, but I've never gotten them up. So with pictures of what goes in each one. So I will do that.
Excellent. Thank you, Judy. So ask and you shall receive. All right, SJ, and then we'll have SJ be the last comment question, and then we're going to thank our team and then give Joy a chance to give us a preview of our next forum, which is about her new book, which builds in some ways, I think, off of our discussion today.
Thank you. I think everything just starts with small steps. And so thank you, Doug, for that, washing our metal things. And just to ask, wash them in a basin with biodegradable soap that we can use and pour that water in the garden. So we're just going to think of things as a closed loop all the time, that we're going to wash them, but we're going to use that water, we're going to put it back in the garden with eco-friendly soaps that don't hurt. But we could also start looking at grey water.
Yeah, we were discussing that earlier.
How that dishwasher's running, but we want it actually to go back and water our plants.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that we actually were in a program to replace some of our pipes with pipes that were specifically for gray water, and we're kind of waiting on political changes to happen so that we can actually get the gray water so that we can use that for watering our plants and things like that.
Yeah, I believe when the courtyard was done, they did purple pipe, purple pipe is pipe specifically designed for gray water use. There was a city program that was supposed to come to campus, which has not made it here yet, which is not a St. Jude's problem, but a city problem. But there are other ways that we've considered and will continue to consider how we might use gray water or rainwater to sustain our island home, as it were. All right, can we give our climate team a big round of applause? Thank you all very much. Any last words?
So we'll be having a meeting some point in the next couple of weeks, and we hope to have a couple more people show up and have input. And so I think that once we figure that out, we'll put that in the announcements, and we'll probably get up during announcements and say something to just remind you guys. So we hope to have more people volunteer to help us out. And then I'll close with something my dad always tells me. He is an editorial writer for the Mercury News, so he talks about different political aspects, but he always likes to say, we end up getting it right. It just takes us a lot longer than we'd like it to. So if we just keep taking more and more small steps towards the right direction, we'll get there eventually. It might take a lot longer than we want, but we got to be committed to taking those steps.
And Penelope, did you want to? Okay. Great. And thank you all. And Joy, if you could come on up. So Joy has written a book, which is fantastic. And, I haven't read the book, but I suspect it's fantastic. But I think it's fantastic that you wrote a book. And I'm really excited that she's going to share that book with us on October 22nd, so about a month from now. We're going to have another forum, same time, after the 10:30 service. And so, Joy, if you would tell us a little bit about it, and then that'll be it for the day.
Sure, and I'll keep it real brief. He hasn't read it because it's not out yet. It's coming out October 15th, and it's called The Cosmic Web, Hope for Our World Through Science and Spirituality. And what it does is it does echo a lot of this creation care that we are all connected. It's written into our ecosystems, but also into the universe. And it means wonderful things about what we can offer. There's been so many people saying today how each tiny act makes a huge difference. I loved Annalise quoting Teilhard, each act of love is an act of peace, it's an act of healing. And so it just points out some of the science that I see in the universe that gives me hope and hopefully gives you tools, all of us tools as well, to continue to make a difference. So hope
Excellent.
You'll come. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joy. We're looking forward to that. There are links for that, and you'll see those soon, and you can pre-order the book so you can read it when it comes out. Have a great afternoon, and we'll see you next Sunday for the Pet Blessing.